This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So, who wrote the anonymous op-ed in the Chicago Tribune inside the White House or the Trump administration somewhere?
In the New York Times.
I always ask the question, well, who stands to benefit the most? Yeah. How about Simon & Schuster? Bob Woodward's book publisher.
Oh, yeah.
How about the timing of this memo with this op-ed with his book? I'm part of the resistance inside the Trump administration, the op-ed goes. And it reads like a never Trump conservative, like something a Bill Kristol or a Charlie Sykes could have written, perhaps more generous. But that doesn't, George Will. But that doesn't mean it is a never Trump conservative, because you can impersonate, somebody else's writing or viewpoints.
Who's the leaker?
The root of the problem is the president's amorality, this anonymous op-ed writer writes. Anyone who works with him knows he is not moored to any discernible first principles that guide his decision-making. Trump appointees have vowed to do what we can to preserve our democratic institutions while thwarting Mr. Trump's more misguided impulses until he's out of office. Don't get me wrong, there are bright spots: effective deregulation, historic tax reform, a more robust military. But these successes have come despite, not because of, the president's leadership style, which is impetuous, adversarial, petty, and ineffective. Meetings with him veer off topic and off the rails. He engages in repetitive rants. He is not somebody who is consistent with the conservative Republican principles of free minds and free markets, this op-ed writer writes.
Well, do you think this gutless anonymous person really exists? Or is this just the New York Times doing this for
conspiracy
to
theories?
Sell papers?
No,
I don't know. I mean, but for
somebody wrote this.
For national security purposes, the New York Times should turn this person over to the government.
Why?
Don't you think? Because they're leaking information.
No.
I don't think they have a right.
There's no leaking information. These are opinions. You're allowed to have opinions. No.
Well, who is it?
I don't know. I think it's,
Is it Barron Trump?
Barron is the mastermind behind this whole operation, as I've always contended. It could be Barron. It could be
Melania. No.
Could be Ivanka.
Oh, it could be Jared.
Or it could be Simon & Schuster's, the publicist assigned to Bob Woodward over at Simon & Schuster. Here's Trump at an event for law enforcement yesterday responding to this op-ed.
He's part of the resistance within the Trump administration. This is what we have to deal with. And, the dishonest media, because you people deal with it as well as I do. But it's really a disgrace. I will say this. Nobody has done what this administration's done in terms of getting things passed and getting things through.
Or in terms of keeping the New York Times afloat, says Trump.
Nobody has ever done in less than a 2-year period what we've done. So when you tell me about some anonymous source within the administration, probably who's failing and probably here for all the wrong reasons, no. And the New York Times is failing. If I weren't here, I believe the New York Times probably wouldn't even exist.
Now, that's not that anonymous opinion is not the unanimous opinion. Trump's former legislative director, Mark Short, was on CNN yesterday, said he didn't contribute to Woodward's book, and he said, no, I never felt the need to protect the country from him. He manages in a different style. It's our job to give him the right information, let him make the decisions, and that's always the way I viewed my job as his legislative director. With respect to Woodward's book, and that you have to discuss Woodward's book in the context of this op-ed. The timing demands it, I think. You've had now Kelly refute what Woodward attributed to him. Mattis say the contemptuous words about the president attributed to me in Woodward's book were never uttered by me or in my presence. It's a definitive statement. You also had Nikki Haley yesterday chime in about these characterizations of the president, and she offered her personal experience?
So I think people read in it what they want to read. I think they see what they want to see. What I can tell you is what I know. And I know that the president has been a great partner to me on foreign security. I meet with him often. I talk with him often. When I have concerns, I bring them to him. He listens, he's respectful, and he engages back. So if there are people who say certain things in the book, I'll just tell you to take it with a grain of salt, just like we've done every book before.
I mean, honestly, I love Nikki Haley. She is a rising star in the Republican Party.
Well, and Bob
solid.
Woodward is easier to is not as easy to dismiss out of hand as Michael Wolff, but it doesn't mean he's beyond reproach. Now, the flip side is listen to what Brit Hume had to say on a Fox News panel about the op-ed, and it goes to the question of, do you believe that this is a problem inside the White House? Nikki Haley suggests it isn't. Brit Hume suggests that this op-ed writer is onto something.
It gets to an interesting question, because what you see here portrayed in at least the excerpts that we've seen from the book is this volcanic president who lays about himself in the most demeaning ways to people around him, walks right up to the edge of what would be incredible, disastrous decisions all the time, and prepared to do this, that, and the other thing, restrained apparently ultimately by aides around him much of the time. And there's an account in there of a document who's about to sign to do something, and they came and took it off his desk. So what does that say to the people in the Never Trump movement, particularly on the right, who don't think that people who are serving in the Trump administration should do so because it participates in this fiasco of a presidency? It seems to me that the lesson that comes away from this is thank God for the people around Trump who are keeping him on the straight and narrow to the extent they can, because that's a service to the country, it seems to me, without question.
Okay, so trying to make sense of all these competing perspectives on the president. To help us do that, we're joined by Matthew Continetti, who's editor of the Washington Free Beacon and a contributing editor of the Weekly Standard. Matthew, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So your reaction to the op-ed, to the Woodward book, and all of the opinions swirling that we were offering examples of?
Well, I think they're two separate issues. The Woodward book is something that every president has to go through. Woodward is very good at capturing the zeitgeist surrounding a president, and I think the best test case of this is his differing books toward George W. Bush. His first book on W happened in between the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war in the aftermath of 9/11. It was very positive. And by the second book, which appeared as the Iraq war was turning sour, all of a sudden it was negative. So what Woodward does is he's able to capture what basically everyone in establishment Washington is thinking. And unsurprisingly, everyone in establishment Washington today is thinking that Donald Trump is not suited to be the president of the United States. On the op-ed, I'm agog. I've never seen something like this before. First of all, we have no idea who this person is, because there are more than 1,000 political appointees in the administration, and who knows what a senior administration official means. Is it someone in the White House? Is it someone who sees Trump, or is it someone who is at an agency somewhere? And
right.
And we have dozens upon dozens of them who has no real influence in the administration. It also sets up a very troubling dynamic within the New York Times, because the reporters in the New York Times now have to figure out who this person is, and the source for that information is their colleagues on the editorial department. So I think there are many reporters actually in the New York Times who are really frustrated and aghast at this op-ed as well. And third, here's the thing. What we've seen time and time again are people taking policy differences with the president and turning them into some titanic struggle for the future of this country. And the fact is, if you read this op-ed, many of the claims in it are just false. President Trump does have guiding principles. It's clear. He wants reciprocity in trade. He wants to protect Social Security and Medicare, and he wants to clamp down on illegal immigration and also change legal immigration. Now, here's the thing. Most people in Washington disagree with these principles. They have for years. They have for 3 years. And so when you see this writer saying, well, I'm trying to save the country from Trump, What they mean is that they disagree with Trump on policy. And the truth is, if they disagree with Trump on policy, they shouldn't be working for him.
Well, we do know, I mean, from the op-ed that they use the pronoun he. So it's not a
that could
woman.
be his pronoun of choice.
Oh,
remember
that's
the era
right.
in which we live. Yeah.
What he's feeling. But Sarah Sanders, they're asking this person to resign. Do you think that will ever come to light?
Well, I will say I believe the identity of the individual who wrote the op-ed will come to light. This is something that we go through often in D.C. The example from the Clinton administration, of course, was the anonymous novel Primary Colors about Bill Clinton,
Joe Klein,
his personal scandals, and eventually it emerged that it was Joe Klein. I would even say when the President Bush, W. Bush, gave his Axis of Evil speech, no one was really clamoring to figure out who the author of the Axis of Evil line was, but the wife of David Frum leaked it to Washington. So sometimes, even if the source or author themselves doesn't want this information out, someone close to them will leak it. So I do believe we're going to find out who this individual is. And the truth of the matter is that could be very damaging to the New York Times, because if it emerges that the senior administration official who is somehow single-handedly saving the country from Donald Trump is again, someone at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or a high level, a GS-16 or something at the EPA. Well, that's just embarrassing, because that's not what is presented in the op-ed at all. The op-ed is presented as though someone who, someone has information regarding cabinet discussions, the most damaging and outrageous thing in that op-ed, and there are many outrageous things about it, I feel. The most outrageous one is when he says that the cabinet discussed using the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office.
Right.
Well, one, if that's the case, that's a scandal above anything else we've seen before. Because what is the reason? It's true that Donald Trump manages this White House as though it were his private business. Of course, private business is all he's ever known. But the fact is, despite his eccentric managing style, one might call it, how has the country been damaged in 2 years? I don't see it. You would think, at the same time that this op-ed was released, you have the best lawyer in the country, Judge Kavanaugh, testifying before the Senate for his confirmation to the Supreme Court. Well, Donald Trump nominated Kavanaugh. If he were this loose, crazy person, wouldn't he have chosen someone different?
Well, don't get me wrong. There are bright spots, the anonymous op-ed writer concedes. I mean, it's sort of understated to put it mildly when you're talking about Gorsuch and Kavanaugh alone. But the interesting thing, and, this is like fun with conspiracy theories. I mean, this could be somebody who's like a deputy director or chief of staff to a cabinet official, maybe say like at the Department of Justice with Jeff Sessions on the way out. And I mean, I'm just, I already offered Simon and Schuster, so why should I stop with my conspiracy theories now?
Yeah.
So I mean, it could be how better to make yourself a cause celeb in D.C. than to do this op-ed. Ultimately, you get outed, probably not by you because you want to be like, you resisted. I didn't want this to happen, and it happened. And then I become a paid analyst on one of the cable news networks, or
write a book,
or my op-ed gets optioned into a Hollywood movie, or I go get a book deal. I mean, that's possible too. I mean,
it is.
Anything's possible, but
it shows kind of the selfishness of the author. Because if the author were truly concerned about the fate of the country, truly concerned, he or she would announce it publicly and resign, and that would be a shocker. That would be someone who had accountability. This is no accountability. This is an anonymous quote. That's all this is. I've called it the longest background quote in American history. It's totally anonymous.
Well,
so whoever wrote it they have no skin in the game.
What about this?
And so this is why it's so kind of revolting to me.
What about this phrase, though? He obviously doesn't want to be like, I'm a lone wolf. Many Trump appointees have vowed to do what we can to preserve our democratic institutions. I mean, what do you hear with the coverage of the Hill that you do? I mean, do you get the sense that there are, many parties, political appointees that are concerned, or that there's some fifth column action going on inside the Trump administration?
I don't know. I think it's a lot of bluster. I really do. I think this op-ed was riddled with cliches. I mean, It's referred to the McCain memorial, and if all you had to do is watch cable news about the way that people were treating John McCain as some bygone from an era when everyone got along in Washington. Right. Well, that era never existed. No. I mean, there's a lot of just wishful thinking in Washington today. So I think that what's clear is that there are many people in this administration who either dislike the president personally and or disagree with him. And the fact is, he was elected the president in the United States. He was elected under the Constitution by the Electoral College. And we've known his views. We've also known his personality. That's no secret. You can log on to Twitter. You see Donald Trump's personality every morning when he starts tweeting. You see it in the rallies. So we've known this personality for 3 years. He was elected president on views that were well established when it comes to trade, immigration, Social Security, and foreign policy. The job of his employees should be to implement his policy. That's what it's about. And if they have disagreements, well, then they should voice those disagreements. They shouldn't be stealing papers from his desk like Gary Cohn admits to in the Woodward book.
Yeah. And
they shouldn't be running to the New York Times under the cover of anonymity to basically unleash rumors. And again, this rumor of this discussion about the 25th Amendment. Unleash these rumors in the pages of the world's most influential newspaper.
He is Matthew Continetti, editor of the Washington Free Beacon and contributing editor to the Weekly Standard. Matthew, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.